I matched into family medicine.
What does it take to get into the residency of your dreams when it seems like all the odds are stacked against you? Welcome to the Road to Residency podcast with your host, John Arshadi. This is the show where we break down inspiring personal journeys of passionate physicians who had the courage and the commitment to take purposeful action to achieve their goals and serve their communities. Well, let's get started. All right. Hello, podcasters. I'm proud to present a brand new version of our podcast. This episode is a little bit different because it's a video podcast. It's going to be the first video podcast we have. We'll see how this goes to see if we're going to continue or not. But I want to introduce my guest, Dr. Zeel Shah. She is a friend of mine, a previous student. And, I'm so excited because this year she matched into family medicine. And very excited for you.
Thank you.
She's done some amazing things. She's been published in multiple journals. She's done a lot of work with COVID relief, and she actually put up a COVID relief website for the state of New York in Staten Island, I believe, right?
Yeah, Staten Island specifically.
Yeah, so she's done a lot of amazing things. She matched into family medicine this year. Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm very excited.
Yeah, I'm excited too. So Zeel, tell us a little bit about your journey. How did you get here from when you graduated to when you matched? Were there any ups and downs? Was there a struggle? Tell us what got you here.
Well, I would say that I had a pretty non-traditional road to residency. I went to medical school in the Caribbean, so by default, that makes me an international medical graduate, or also known as a foreign medical graduate. And that presented its own unique set of challenges. Going to the Caribbean, the school that I went to, they had varying qualities of rotations. So I do think that I got a pretty good clinical experience, but it did definitely impact my ability to network and meet people that I needed to meet in order to optimize my chances for residency itself. And I had my own challenges, in particular, like my board scores weren't the greatest board scores in the world. So I'm sure as many of you guys know, the USMLE board scores are one of the most important factors that play in when it comes to residency. But I unfortunately didn't have that. So I had to do several other things to prove that I'm more than what my board scores show, and I have a lot more to bring to the table. So that took me down a really long, winding path.
Right. Yeah, no, I understand that. A lot of my students, and even myself, we had problems with board scores and multiple attempts. And unfortunately, for better or worse, that's like you said, the most important thing that they look at, especially step one. That's their number one criteria.
Yeah, and I don't know how that's going to change now that it's going to be pass or fail.
Pass, fail.
I feel like it's going to be disadvantageous for IMGs personally. Because that was like, as that was one of the ways that people who were good at taking exams, they could really set themselves apart. But now if it's pass or fail, residency programs are going to have to use a filter with something else.
Well, so I think what's going to happen, this is just my opinion here, but I think the natural progression is they're just going to look at the number of attempts. And if it's on, the first attempt, which is what they're looking for, gone are the days that you can have 2 or 3 attempts and be fine. I think with a pass and fail system, you have to pass on the first attempt, right? And after that, it's going to be the step 2 score. So you're just going to
put more weight on the step 2 score. But for those of you listening that do have multiple attempts, that's not to say that you can't get into it. It's just you're going to have to work a little bit harder or just do things that are a little bit unconventional relative to your first attempt counterparts.
Absolutely. Yeah, I didn't mean to say it was impossible. I'm just saying it's going to be harder.
Oh, absolutely.
With pass and fail.
For sure.
So, Zeel, tell us a little bit about the COVID relief you did in Staten Island. That was interesting.
Right. So last year at the time, unfortunately, I didn't match. So I had a gap year, and then the way the pandemic hit, all my backup externships and rotations, they all got canceled. So I pretty much was sitting at home, like not really able to do anything because I was not allowed to go into the hospital. And my hands are tied. So what I did was I worked with a mentor of mine. He is a geriatrician on Staten Island, working at Staten Island University Hospital. And what we worked together was to create a website, which was a consolidated resource for healthcare workers. And the rationale that I had when making this website is the fact that, I, despite having not matched, do have medical background. So for all the healthcare workers that are just on the front lines, the way that I could do my part is try to sort of make sense of the onslaught of information that was coming. It was kind of like drinking out of a fire hose. There was so much different information that was constantly changing. So anyway, long story short, that's what I tried to do. Consolidate relevant research papers, consolidate resources, resources that were relevant to the community as well as patients. And in doing so, I worked with the Office of the Borough President and several local organizations on Staten Island. So I think it really did help healthcare workers quite a bit, because it was just like a one-stop shop. It was easy to navigate. You didn't have to go to so many different research portals or journals.
Right. That's excellent. And so are you still keeping up with that, or are you going to continue that even through residency?
Yeah, so because this is an ongoing situation, even though the urgency of it with regard to the constant update has kind of decreased relative to last year, we're still going to continue to update the website. Initially, it's a constantly evolving space on the internet. So for instance, when the pandemic first started and there was issues finding PPEs, we were trying to get PPEs to hospitals that needed it. And then it became an issue of where to go for testing. So then we provided that kind of information. And then there was another word, donation. So it's a constantly evolving website resource. So it will evolve to suit the needs of whatever comes next.
That's excellent. And so we have a lot of listeners who are, they're here in the US, they're trying to match, sometimes they've tried once or twice and it hasn't happened yet. And they're looking for ways to network, to stand out, to do projects like you did, to get published. How would they get started? What advice do you have for them?
Well, first and foremost, I completely understand it is very difficult. So for anybody that's listening and feels like it's really hard, it's because it is. There's nothing wrong with you. It is hard. And especially if you are not from the United States, you're an international medical grad, you don't have connections or a medical school rotation in the country. It's very, very difficult. And I completely understand that, having been there myself. Shameless plug, I'm making a video on that, but I'll give you a little a brief summary of the things that I find to be helpful. With regard to networking, I definitely think if you are a foreign medical graduate, if you're an international medical graduate, if you have any red flags or if you have any attempts, it is very key that you need to put yourself out there and market yourself to prove that you are more than what the application shows, because the other person that's sitting on the other side of it will not see that. So you have to do it, right? There's no way around it. That's just, you're gonna have to do it. So ways to do it, conferences. But in a pandemic world, these conferences are more difficult, I would say, because they've become more virtual, but you could still use those. Also, you could use social media like LinkedIn, even though that also might be difficult, just because a lot of doctors are not on LinkedIn. But either way, anybody that you can talk to, you should talk to. And if you get back to normal conferences, I have several tips that I think would be useful. Especially if you're shy or if it's your first time. I remember my first time, I was super nervous, and I was really intimidated by all these people who were like super accomplished, and it was very nerve-wracking. But I would honestly say, like, the best advice that I would give is just smile and say hi, because oftentimes the other person is just as nervous as you are. So it's easier just to break the ice. And so that's one way. to get to know people. Another way is that if you're at a conference, ask if the person is presenting, and if they are, you already have something that you can talk to. And if they are not, you can ask them about the sessions that they're interested in. So basically, the purpose of networking is try to find people that you have something in common with and try to get to know the other person. And then through that, you can keep in touch and have a basis or form a basis to build a relationship that you could hopefully leverage for a good position.
Awesome. So how was it for you when you first started? Were you intimidated? Were you scared? How did you learn the ropes of how to do this networking that you're talking about?
So the first time, my first conference where I was actually networking at consciously was when I was selected to be a presenter at this interventional cardiology conference. And I was very intimidated and very nervous because I was only one of two medical students, and there were a lot of world-renowned interventional cardiologists there. So I felt like totally out of my depth. Like I didn't know what I was doing there, and my attending was super busy. I didn't know anybody. So I was like, I could literally just go lie in fetal position for like the next hour. And I feel like that would be a good use of my time. But so it was very intimidating. It was very overwhelming. So that's how I felt the first time. And then, like I said, what worked for me was that just when I was about to go back to my hotel room, I just happened to make eye contact with somebody that was attending the conference. My natural inclination is just to smile, say hi. And then I realized that person was nervous too. And then we just started talking like, oh, what are you interested in? What sessions are you interested in? Are you presenting? Are you not presenting? And I think it was just through that I realized it's really just a numbers game, kind of like when you're dating. You're just trying to meet as many people as you can and try to get to know the other person to see if there is something that you have in common, or if you have a common goal or common interest that you can build off of. So that's what I did. So I, like, going back to that, it's not like the first conversation I had led anywhere. It didn't. I don't keep in touch with that person, but it really opened my eyes that you just have to be calm and like try to just realize that the other person is just as nervous. I would suggest making a confidence playlist so you feel like a boss when you're walking down at that conference, because
Right.
you really want to feel confident because people can feel that kind of energy.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I always
Mhm.
tell the students that I work with, especially in interviews and any networking that you do, it's kind of like an interview anyways, right? So you want to put your best foot
Yeah.
forward. And sometimes you just don't have that energy. Sometimes you're just down, you don't know what to do. And the one way you can pump yourself up is just by changing your physiology. So for instance, close your eyes and imagine in your head that you're thinking of somebody who is sad and depressed, right? What do they look like?
Hmm. Hmm.
I'll take myself, for example. I'd be like slumped over like this, slouching, head down, not making eye contact, right? So you want to do the exact opposite. If you pull your shoulders back, stand up straight, head tall, you talk louder, talk faster, by changing that physiology, you automatically change your psychology and you get yourself pumped up that way, right? Even if you have
Yeah,
to do some power
absolutely.
poses, stand
Hmm.
like Superman, that'll work.
Right. You just want to increase your surface area, I believe. Like,
Yeah.
I think that's the logic. I think for me, what worked was I had literally a playlist of like Beyonce and like Cardi B, where I felt like I was like, yeah, I'm confident, you know? And I think naturally you like embody that kind of vibe, like whatever makes you feel confident.
Mhm.
Because you don't want to come off arrogant at the same
Right.
time. You want to just be in a positive mindset. So listen to some good music, put some makeup on, maybe not too much, put on clothes that make you feel good. And as long as you feel good, you're going to look good because it's going to radiate out and it's going to transmit to the other person. So that's what I would really recommend.
For sure. All
Yeah.
right. And so you put in a selfish plug a little while ago,
Yeah.
and this is something I wanted to talk about because I'm excited. So you have a YouTube
Yes.
channel, right?
Guys,
And
come check me out.
absolutely. So we're going to give you the channel name to go check out that channel. But you had a couple of them, right? You had a couple different shows.
So I have one channel, Zeel Shah
Okay,
MD,
I
on
see.
YouTube, and I had several series. One of them was Medical Munchie Mondays, where I would discuss research articles while attempting to bake something. Another one was Let's Talk Tuesdays, where it was surrounding CDC guidelines predominantly with
Yeah.
regard to COVID. Now I think my YouTube channel will probably be surrounding tips and things that I felt that was useful for me on my residency journey, because I believe that would be of greatest value to the listeners, and also my residency journey. So for people that are incoming residents, at least you can follow my journey and see the things that I learned and hopefully not make the same mistakes.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of our listeners are gonna love, that channel. So go to Zeel Shah MD, you said, on YouTube.
Yes.
Zeel Shah MD on YouTube. Check her out.
Thank you.
Her videos are good. I remember watching that COVID video you did in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Yeah, I enjoyed that. Let's talk a little bit about, what can a person, apart from the networking and apart from finding extra projects to work on, what can a person do to strengthen their application in terms of, letters of recommendations, personal statements, stuff like that?
Well, the thing is that because there's such a diversity of programs, each program weighs each factor pretty differently. I would suggest as an applicant, the best that you can do is like whatever's in your control and know generally what factors count the most across the board, which tends to be your board scores. But once you do your boards, it's kind of out of your control. Your letters of recommendation. I've heard from people that interviewed me, my letters of recommendation really played a huge factor. They really appreciated them. So it's very important that you get these letters from people that know you well. And I know that this is something that has been repeated on and on and on. But the thing is, I do also know that if you're from the Caribbean, the reality is that you're not necessarily going to know your program director that you're working with as a medical student that well, or you may just not have had the ability to form a good connection with someone in order for them to give you a very solid letter of recommendation. In that situation, what I would recommend is that you should, well, if you don't have any other options, you use it, right? You got to use it because you have to have a letter of recommendation. But it's very important that you update them. So let's say if you didn't match, you can't use the same letter again. You want to try to get updated and detailed letters of recommendation.
Mm-hmm.
So that's very important. I think it also matters, not hugely, but it helps, I would say, if you have someone that's in a position of like power, in the sense that they have some sort of decision-making ability, perhaps like an associate program director or a program director, or someone that's a chief, or like anybody from that kind of like position. It has a little bit heavier of a weight. I don't think it's a make or break, but it helps. Also, with regard to the personal statement, I think that a lot of people tend to worry about the personal statement. And yes, it is absolutely important. And the degree of importance truly, truly varies based on the person, not even the program, like the person that's reading your application. Like even at the program, you could have two different people interviewing you. One cares about it, one doesn't. But what I would say generally is don't stress about it too much, because if you have an otherwise amazing application, unless your personal statement says that you're a serial killer or like something horrible, like massive red flag, I don't think it's going to really knock you down too much. And the opposite is also true, that if you have a mediocre or, less than admirable application, you can't solely compensate for it with an extraordinary letter of recommendation. So it's kind of just like a good way to, from my interviews at least, it was a good way for them to ask me questions about me, and a good way to start the dialogue, because a lot of times they're so busy they haven't had time to read your entire application. So that's what. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Also, key thing, like I noticed on both the seasons that I applied, people, and this was definitely true this entire season, people asked me questions from the hobbies and interests. So when I actually wrote that, I was like, do they actually care about this? But once you get the interview, I actually did get a lot of questions about like whatever I had listed as my hobbies or interests.
Yeah. And is it okay to put, normal personal hobbies or interests? Because a lot of students, They want to put stuff that's related to medicine to make it look better. But is it okay to just say, hey, I like fishing, or I like cooking?
I put baking, and in
Yeah.
brackets, I put I make the best chocolate brownie. And I actually got a question about it. And then I wrote, I like Harry Potter. I mean,
Right.
actually, none of my hobbies pertained directly to medicine.
Hmm.
You want to be interesting
Right.
because they're going to have to work with you for 3 years.
Hmm.
And if you're a robot that just talks medicine, it's not exactly, you know,
Yeah.
someone that's fun to be, stuck with for 100 hours a week for 3 years.
Right.
You have to be able to do both. You want to be well rounded. Obviously, you have
Mhm.
medicine, you have an entire application dedicated to medicine, but you want to also have a personality.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, going into the interview, did you find anything along the way that really helped you prepare for these interviews? Were there any books or anything you practiced?
Well, so there are several things that helped me out quite a bit. Generally, to get a broad overview of the actual process, I read this book,
Mhm.
not
Successful
sponsored,
match.
The
Right.
Successful Match 2017. It's kind of old and not necessarily completely applicable because it was last published in 2017 and the match has changed, but it was a good idea just to get a broad strokes idea of everything that was going on and what was the most relevant things to be mindful of. So that helped. The second thing that helped was actually prepping the questions, and prepping for the questions. And I don't mean like word for word be rehearsed that, I'm going to say this, and this,
Yeah.
because you don't want to sound like um, a computer. Like you want to be have a
Right.
human interaction with
For
the
sure.
person, right? So you want to be unforgettable, but for the right
Right.
reasons. Like,
Yeah.
so what helped for me was having a general structure for answering questions. And the structure primarily entailed, like, if someone were to ask me, what's your greatest strength or greatest weakness, which is a very common question, um, I would state like the quality and then just perhaps one sentence as to why I thought that, and then give an example just to emphasize it, because you don't want to be boring and be like, oh, I do this, I do that. Like you want to illustrate it. Um, and I think that's like that kind of structure is very helpful to have in any situation. Always make sure to have an example. So the other thing that I did was when I was prepping for interviews, I wrote down a lot of like key examples of things that occurred during my medical school journey that I could talk about, whether it was something that emphasized a strength, something that emphasized a conflict, something that emphasized a weakness. Um, so I had set examples that I would be able to use based on whatever question was thrown my way. So that definitely helped. I would highly recommend when you're prepping, just write down a bunch of scenarios that occurred.
Excellent. That's really helpful. Let's talk
Hmm.
about attire. And I only say this because there was an incident, now with COVID and everything, they're having virtual interviews. And so there was an
Yeah.
incident where one candidate thought it was okay to come to the interview with a bath towel around her head. And
No,
I,
that did not
you
happen.
can't make this up. This happened. It happened in
That
actually
doesn't sound real. Are you
I
serious?
swear. So this happened in my wife's residency program. I'm not going to say the name of the program or anything,
Right.
but this happened and everybody ridiculed her and they put her at the bottom of the list only for that reason. She was actually a really good candidate, but I know most people won't do that. But just to make sure that nobody does something like that, let's talk about what is appropriate attire even through a virtual interview.
My rule of thumb is even if it's a virtual interview, treat it as if it's a real in-person interview. That means like I didn't do the typical Zoom attire where you were just relaxed at the bottom with pajamas and like,
Yeah.
formal on top. I
Mhm.
literally wore my suit because you just never know. Like, what if you had to get up for something and, they see that you did not take them seriously, it just,
Mhm.
it's not worth the comfort. And it also, I feel like it puts you in the correct mindset that you're actually taking it very seriously. So, whatever you would typically wear for a real in-person interview is exactly what you should wear for a virtual one. With virtual, I think you should take into consideration more of the technical aspect in terms of making sure that your internet connection is good, make sure that you have good lighting, make sure that your audio quality is good, because the last thing you want to do is them not being able to understand what you're saying,
Right.
because it cuts into your time. So the way that my virtual interviews were set up is that they're basically in a Zoom kind of format, and then the interviews go into a breakaway room, and then
Hmm.
that room has a timer on it. And then once the 20 minutes are up, you get a 5 minute warning, and then you automatically get booted to the main session, or it just rotates depending on how they have it set up. So it's very important that you want to utilize that time slot that you have to optimize you as an applicant to the best of your ability. And the easiest way to do that is to make sure that you don't have any silly technical errors, because it just makes you look bad. It makes everybody look bad, makes you look disinterested. Of course, there are things that can happen as an accident, but try to avoid it as much as possible. I would even recommend I would even recommend having two things ready to go, because fun fact, during one of my interviews, this actually happened. I found out um, they had a cancellation, and the program called me and asked me, "Oh, would you be willing to, interview with us?" And I was like, "Of course." And they're like, "It's tomorrow." I was like, "Okay." And so I was interviewing the absolute next day, and I was at the time in a hotel, so the internet wasn't that great. And so I luckily had my laptop. The I had the internet going just as my interview was supposed to start. The Wi-Fi in the hotel went down.
Oh no.
It was so stressful,
Oh
but
no.
luckily I had my phone ready to go as backup. Everything was like loaded in. So I just clicked on Zoom on my phone, and I was just back up. So I literally gave like an interview on my phone, like, because the Wi-Fi wasn't working.
Right.
So you just
Right.
want to make sure that you've accounted for any situation,
Hmm.
because you don't want to waste their time, and you want to make sure that they know that you're taking this very seriously, because it is very serious.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you for
Yeah.
that advice. And I would even say,
Yeah.
if you can, at least for that, couple months of interview season, get a Wi-Fi hotspot on your phone if you don't have one
Yeah.
already. So
Yeah.
that'll definitely help. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, at the same time, like, technical failures are inevitable. There was, sometimes there was issues on the program side, but the thing is, like, as much as possible, you don't want to be the cause of it.
Right. For
Yeah.
sure. All right. Well, thank you for all that information. Anything you want to
Okay.
tell our guests? Any last minute advice? What would be your word of advice to the listeners of the Road to Residency?
Never give up. It's not over until you say it's over. So,
Right.
no matter how many red flags you have, no matter what anybody tells you, if you think that and you have to be honest with yourself, if you truly think that you're going to help people and you have what it takes to give back and care for people as a good physician,
Mhm.
then just go for it, no matter how long it takes, because if it's your calling, it's going to happen.
Absolutely. They say you never failed until you stop trying. So
Yeah.
don't stop trying. Keep going. Keep going.
Yeah. And don't be afraid to try new things. I think one of the reasons that I matched, I don't know this for a fact, but I think
Mhm.
it's because I kept trying to do things that were outside my comfort zone, and they were not necessarily pertinent directly to medicine. And sometimes that makes you an interesting candidate. So don't be afraid to fail. Don't be afraid to step outside your comfort zone and do things that you normally wouldn't, because the world's always changing. So you
Mhm.
can't be the same.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. If you want something different, you got to try different things, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly, exactly,
for
exactly.
sure. All right. Well, Zeel, thanks a lot for your time.
Thank
It's been a
you.
pleasure speaking to you and talking to you after such a long time. It's been what,
I
like 3 years,
know.
4 years, something
It's
like
a very
that.
long time.
It's been a
Thanks for
very long time.
having me.
Yeah. Now, everybody, go check out Zeel Shah MD on YouTube. Check out
Thank
her COVID
you.
relief website in Staten Island. And we'll have this video up on her YouTube channel. We'll have the podcast up on, the Road to Residency podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Google. Thank you all for spending your time with us, listening to us.
Yeah.
We hope that, we helped you out a little bit. If you have any questions or concerns at all, don't hesitate to reach out to me or to Zeel. Our contact info will be in the show notes. We'll have links to the websites, links to the YouTube channel, all that stuff. Thanks again. Zeel, any last words before we part?
No, thank you so much. I really appreciate being on your podcast. And thank you to all the listeners who took the time out of their day to listen to this. And I hope to see you on my channel.
Awesome. All right. Until next week. If you haven't already, please rate and review the podcast. Share it with your friends and get this message out there, because this is a time where a lot of people are skeptical and they're saying, I'm an older grad, I'm an IMG, I have trouble with the USMLEs, there's no way I can compete, what do I do? Well, we want to show you that there is hope. Actually, right now is the best time to match as an IMG. Our match rates have gone up from 48% in 2010 when I graduated medical school to 61% in the 2020 match. That's a significant jump. And as a matter of fact, more than 25% of the U.S. healthcare system is made up of international grads. So know that you can do it. You will do it. Just don't give up. And I hope to see you in the next episode.